In the frozen landscapes of the early 1990s Norway, a musical movement emerged that was darker, colder, and more extreme than anything the world had ever seen. It started in the basement of a record shop as a quest to make the most evil sound possible, and it spiraled into a cult of death and destruction. This was the Black Circle, a group of teenagers who had become a shadowy collective of musicians, deciding to blur the lines between performative Satanism and genuine, terrifying violence, waging a private war against the very fabric of Norwegian society. The legacy they left behind is gruesome: death, arson, and cold-blooded murder that still haunts the music industry today. There's the grisly aftermath of the vocalist Dead's self-destruction, and the flames that reduced centuries-old churches to ash. The story of the Inner Circle is a descent into absolute madness. This is the story of the most disturbing music scene ever. Let's get spooky. Hey, spooky people, it's your best friend Kenny, and we are back with another disturbing story. Before we get to today's story, make sure that you are subscribed to this channel. Make sure that you like, share, and comment on this video for the algorithm. Thank you. The early 1990s in Norway witnessed one of the most disturbing episodes in the history of modern music. This cohort of young men initiated a campaign under the guise of a music scene. This movement centered around a small record shop in Oslo called Helvete, or Hell, and it became known to the world as the Black Circle, or the Black Metal Inner Circle. The sensationalist media at the time labeled them satanic terrorists, but a more nuanced look reveals a complex story. It was the perfect storm of adolescent alienation, radicalization, and the blurring of boundaries between performative art and violent reality. The Black Circle was a loose group linked by a shared hatred of people and a wish to destroy what they saw as the dullness of Norwegian society. These were not a well-organized criminal group. At the center of this movement stood Øystein Aarseth, who is known by the stage name Euronymous. He was born in March 1968, and Aarseth was the founder and guitarist of the band Mayhem, which formed in 1984. Unlike many of his peers, who viewed heavy metal as just a musical preference, Aarseth saw it as a lifestyle. He was the architect of the black metal identity in Norway, distinguishing it from the trendier and more commercialized death metal scene that was gaining popularity in Sweden and the United States. Aarseth's ideology was a mix of Satanism and totalitarian admiration. He frequently cited communist dictatorships out of a fascination with their ability to oppress and spread misery. This hatred of people was the foundational pillars of the Black Circle. He sought to create a movement that was exclusive, elitist, and genuinely dangerous. Now, I'm going to be doing my best to pronounce these Scandinavian words as well as I can. But, you know, if I make mistakes, you guys can make fun of me in the comments. In May 1990, Aarseth opened the record shop Helvete in Oslo. The shop was a curated environment designed to radicalize its patrons. The interior was painted black and adorned with medieval weaponry. It featured a tombstone in the window. The basement was a damp and labyrinth space, which became the meeting ground for the Black Circle. The social dynamics within Helvete were responsible for the group's evolution. It was a loose network of individuals connected by shared values and social spaces. Young musicians, including members of bands like Emperor, Barzum, and Dark Throne, congregated there. Aarseth acted as the gatekeeper, deciding who was true and who was a poser. The approval mechanism created a competitive environment where status was gained through demonstrations of extremism. Who could be the most metal? The Black Circle is heavily debated. The media portrayed it as a structured satanic mafia, but insiders like Bard Faust Etham have stated that the name was largely an invention of Aarseth, used to project an image of organized power to the outside world. There weren't membership cards, formal meetings, budgets, but the lack of a formal structure didn't mean that it wasn't a dangerous group. There was informal pressure to conform to the group's violent rhetoric, and it created a slippery slope of radicalization, where violence eventually demanded physical proof. Today, Helvete, which is operating as Nese Blue Records, has become a pilgrimage site of sorts for fans of the genre. Visitors describe the experience as a rite of passage, viewing the black metal graffiti still present on the basement walls as historical artifacts, almost like cave paintings. The fact that this has become a tourist space shows that there is a cognitive dissonance between the fact that this place had a violent history and now it's become a cultural curiosity. This place has become commercialized. You can buy souvenirs of a movement that once plotted to blow up cathedrals. It's transformed one of the most extreme subcultures into the very capitalist that they rebelled against. Per Yngve Olin, who is known as Dead, was its emotional core. He self-unalived in 1991, and that event is what transitioned the scene into a real disturbing scene. Dead was a Swedish vocalist who joined Mayhem in 1988, and he brought severe, disturbing illness to the group. He was described by bandmates as deeply introverted, depressed, and socially awkward. This delusion showed itself in his daily life and in his stage performance. Dead would bury his stage clothes in the ground days before concerts so they would smell of earth and decomposition. He would keep dead birds in bags to inhale the stench of death before singing. On stage, he would engage in extreme self-harm until he required medical attention. On April 8, 1991, Dead self-unalived in the house he shared with Euronymous and Hellhammer in Krokstad. His note famously began with, "Excuse the blood." The reaction of Euronymous to this tragedy marks a turning point for the Black Circle. Upon finding the body, Euronymous did not call the police immediately. Instead, he drove to a nearby store to purchase a disposable camera. He rearranged the scene, reportedly moving a knife and a shotgun to frame the photo more artistically, and took pictures of his friend's corpse. One of the photographs was later used as the cover for the bootleg live album Dawn of the Black Hearts. This was an exploitive, ideological statement. Euronymous used the self-unaliving to claim the Mayhem and the Black Circle were true to the concept of death, unlike the fake commercial bands. He claimed that Dead self-unalived because the scene had become too trendy, weaponizing the tragedy to enforce purity within the subculture. Following the death of Dead, disturbing stories emerged that Euronymous had harvested parts of his body. These stories served to build the myth of the Black Circle. It's widely rumored that Euronymous collected pieces of Dead's brain and cooked them in a stew, which he ate. However, Mayhem members, including Hellhammer and Necro Butcher, have consistently denied this. They say that this was Euronymous' tendency to exaggerate his own evil persona to intimidate outsiders. It's also been rumored that Euronymous collected bone fragments from the shattered skull and fashioned them into necklaces and gifted them to musicians he deemed worthy. And this is true. It's been confirmed by multiple recipients. Morgan Steinmeier Håkansson of the Swedish band Marduk confirmed in interviews he received a package from Euronymous containing 2 pieces of the skull and lead from a shotgun shell, and he claims to still possess them. Other recipients include Metal Lion, who is the editor of the Slayer magazine, and Faust. In 2018, a skull fragment accompanied by a letter from Euronymous was even offered for sale, providing physical evidence that this was true. Distributing these relics created a blood pact among the inner circle. Possessing a piece of Dead's skull was the ultimate signifier of status, binding the recipient to the group's nihilistic ethos. It also disgusted Mayhem bassist Necro Butcher, leading to his departure from the band, a decision that arguably saved his life as it removed him from the escalating conflict between Euronymous and Varg Vikernes. Between 1992 and 1996, Norway experienced a wave of church arsons that shocked the nation. At least 50 churches were attacked, many of them centuries-old wooden stave churches of immense historical value. These attacks were targeted symbolic strikes against Christianity, which the Black Circle viewed as an occupying force that had eradicated Norway's pagan heritage. The motivations behind these arsons reveal a fracture in the group's ideology. Euronymous, who adhered to theistic Satanism, argued that burning churches was a way to spread grief, despair, and evil, and thereby pleasing the devil. He viewed the emotional suffering of the Christian community as the primary goal. In contrast, Varg Vikernes framed the attacks as pagan terrorism, or odalism. He argued that stave churches were often built upon pre-Christian holy sites to desecrate them. Burning the churches was an act of historical reclamation, in his view, for the Viking gods. For Euronymous, the act was about being evil. For Vikernes, it was about heritage and nationalism. This ideological difference would contribute to growing animosity between these two men. Analysis of the group dynamic suggests that ideology may have been a post hoc justification for acts driven by peer pressure and status seeking, or they made these reasons up after they happened. The burning of the Holmenkollen Chapel offers a clear example. Faust and Vikernes were the primary instigators, but Euronymous participated. Faust later observed that Euronymous joined in because he felt like he had to prove that he could be a part of it and not just in the background. As Vikernes gained notoriety for his action, Euronymous who is the leader, felt his authority slipping, compelling him to participate in crimes to maintain his status. After the church burnings, the violence escalated to human targets. The murder of Magne Andreassen on August 21st, 1992, was where the Black Circle became a murderous gang. Faust, the drummer from the band Emperor, was visiting family in Lillehammer. Walking home from a pub through the Olympic Park, he was approached by a man named Magne Andreassen. According to Faust's testimony, Andreassen solicited him for sex. Faust had a knife. He pretended to agree and led Andreassen into the woods. Once in the forest, Faust stabbed Andreassen 37 times and repeatedly stomped on his head to ensure death. He then returned home, showered, and later fled to Oslo to rejoin his buddies at Helvete. When Faust confessed the murder to Euronymous and Vikernes, he was met with approval. The murder became an open secret within the inner circle, elevating Faust's status as someone who had crossed the ultimate line. Faust later stated he felt no remorse, describing the act with chilling detachment. I wanted to see what it was like to kill a person. The group believes the motive was performative. It was an act of evil committed to validate the perpetrator's identity as a true black metal musician. In early 1993, the unity of the Black Circle began to disintegrate into a deadly rivalry between its two most prominent figures, Euronymous and Varg Vikernes. In January 1993, Vikernes conducted an interview with the newspaper Bergen to promote his musical project Barzum. In the interview, he adopted the persona of Count Grishnackh and claimed responsibility for the church burnings and the Lillehammer murder. The headline, "We Lit the Fires," sensationally brought the scene to national attention. This interview was a disaster for Euronymous. The ensuing police investigation forced him to close Helvete, severing his primary source of income and his social power base. However, thrived on the attention, positioning himself as the new face of the movement. The animosity was fueled by mundane grievances. Vikernes claimed he was owed substantial royalties for Barzum albums. He also felt that Euronymous was incompetent and deceitful. Vikernes was moving rapidly towards an odalist worldview, while Euronymous maintained his peculiar communist Satanist stance. Vikernes began to view Euronymous' evil as superficial and his reliance on Satan as a religious construct. Rumors circulated that Euronymous planned to rid himself of Vikernes. According to Vikernes, a mutual friend informed him that Euronymous planned to stun him with an electroshock weapon, bind him, drive him to the woods, and torture him to death while filming the event. Whether this was a genuine threat or another one of Euronymous' fantasies is unknown, but Vikernes cited it as an immediate trigger for what he would do next. The group would actively terrorize other bands they deemed untrue to the metal lifestyle, or life metal, which was a derogatory term in the death metal community. An 18-year-old girl who was associated with the circle attempted to burn down the home of Kristoffer Jansson, the leader of the Swedish band Therion. She left a message signed The Count, indicating she was acting on Vikernes' orders or influence. During a tour in Norway, the British band Paradise Lost had their tour bus attacked by black metal fans, an incident that was supposedly instigated by the rhetoric of the circle. Threats were reportedly sent to Glenn Benton of the American band Deicide, who the Norwegians viewed as commercial Satanist. Tensions culminated on the night of August 10th, 1993. Vikernes was accompanied by Blackthorn, who is the guitarist of the band Thorns, and drove from Bergen to Oslo, a trip of approximately 7 hours to confront this. Vikernes and Blackthorn left Bergen in the evening. Vikernes claimed he brought a signed contract to terminate his relationship with Euronymous and to tell Euronymous to fuck off. They arrived at Euronymous' apartment building in Oslo around 3 or 4 in the morning. Blackthorn stayed to smoke a cigarette in the stairwell while Vikernes went to the 4th floor apartment. Vikernes was let into the apartment and an argument ensued. Vikernes claimed Euronymous kicked him in the chest and ran for a knife. The evidence, however, showed that Euronymous was stabbed multiple times in the back, suggesting that he was fleeing. The struggle moved to the stairwell. Vikernes stabbed Euronymous 23 times, 2 to the head, 5 to the neck, and 16 to the back. Euronymous died on the stairs. Vikernes and Blackthorn drove back to Bergen, disposing of bloody clothes and the weapon along the way. They attempted to create an alibi by renting a videotape in Bergen before leaving, hoping the timestamp would confuse the timeline. Vikernes was arrested on August 19, 1993. The trial in May 1994 became a media spectacle. Vikernes was convicted of the murder, as well as 3 counts of arson and the possession of 150 kilograms of explosives. He would claim that these explosives were for defending Norway against an invasion, though police suspected he planned to blow up a cathedral. He was sentenced to 21 years in prison, the maximum penalty under Norwegian law. When the verdict was read, Vikernes turned to the cameras and smiled. a chilling image that cemented his status as an icon of unrepentant nihilism. The Black Circle is a case study in group radicalization. According to the Macaulay and Masalenko theories of radicalization, several factors were at play. There was group polarization. The isolated environment of Helvete created an echo chamber where extreme views were reinforced. To be accepted, one had to adopt the group's norms, which were increasingly violent. There was also competition. The contest status meant that each member had to outdo the others. If Dead harmed himself, Faust had to kill somebody. If Faust killed somebody, Varg had to burn churches. This escalation ladder is common in gang dynamics, but isn't usually seen in music scenes. The self-unaliving of Dead acted as an unfreezing event, destabilizing the group's moral compass and making previously unthinkable acts acceptable. For example, the keeping of skull fragments. The group's adoption of Satanism was initially a rejection of Christian societal norms. However, by committing crimes in the name of this ideology, they trapped themselves in a, trap. Once they were labeled as satanic terrorists by the media, they had no path back to mainstream society, pushing them further into extremism to justify their ruined social standing. There is an interesting Mayhem album that encapsulates the entire tragedy of this music scene called De Mysteriis Dom Sathanas. It was released in May 1994 and features Euronymous on guitar and Varg Vikernes on bass. Following the murder, Euronymous' family requested that Hellhammer remove Vikernes' bass tracks. Hellhammer agreed but failed to do so, later saying, "I thought it was appropriate that the murderer and the victim were on the same record." The album is widely considered to be a masterpiece of the black metal genre, but its listening experience is linked to the knowledge that the rhythm section is composed of a killer and its victim. It's a monument to how disturbing the Black Circle was. The murder of Euronymous effectively ended the Black Circle. With its leader dead and its most prominent members in prison, the centralized structure collapsed. The second wave of black metal continued, but the centralized cult-like violence dissipated. The disturbing stories of the Black Circle, the skull necklaces, the murders, the burning of churches, are potent because they represent a terrifying subculture that took its own fantasy too seriously. They wanted to be evil as an artistic statement, and in doing so, unleashed real-world suffering that destroyed their own lives and the lives of others. The Black Circle was a group of young men who succeeded only in destroying themselves. Make sure to subscribe to this channel, The Spooky Lawyer. Make sure that you like, share, and comment on this video for the algorithm. And hit the hype button. Follow me on Twitter, Blue Sky, and TikTok. My username is The Spooky Lawyer. If there is a disturbing story you would like me to cover, leave a comment and tell me about it. Or send me an email. My email address is thespookylawyer@gmail.com. If you'd like to support the channel, there is a link in the description to buy me a coffee so you can buy me a coffee. Or you can become a member of this channel. For the $1.99 tier, you can get access to exclusive content, including exclusive videos. I appreciate you considering this. You also support me by continuing to like, share, comment on, and watch my videos. And I really do appreciate that you watch my videos. And please stay spooky.